I heard the hammer before I saw them. The dull, deliberate thud of metal against wood, echoing across my front yard like someone signing a contract I never agreed to. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the smell of fresh paint was already in the air, sharp and chemical, clinging to the early morning humidity like it belonged there. A bright red foreclosure notice hung crooked on my gate, still dripping at the edges, and Margaret Whitmore stood just beyond it with her arms folded, watching me like she'd finally finished something she'd been planning for months. "You should have handled your obligations, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, almost pleasant, the kind of tone people use when they think they've already won. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked closer, every step slow, measured, like I had all the time in the world. The farmhouse behind me creaked in the breeze, old wood settling. The same sound I'd grown up with, the same sound my father used to call the house breathing. 40 acres of land, a wraparound porch, a barn that leaned just slightly to the left after a storm back in '98. Nothing fancy, nothing polished, but it was mine. Or at least, that's what they were trying to change. Two men in pressed polos stood near the fence line, clipboards in hand, pretending not to stare while they measured distances they didn't understand. HOA logos stitched onto their chests like badges. Margaret's perfume drifted across the yard, something expensive trying too hard to mask something sour underneath. "You've been in violation for months," she continued, gesturing toward the notice like it explained everything. "Unapproved structures, non-compliant land use, failure to respond to multiple citations." Her smile tightened just enough to show satisfaction. "This is just procedure." Procedure. I let that word sit there for a second, felt it settle in the silence between us. A crow called from the oak tree near the driveway, and somewhere down the road, a truck engine idled before fading away. I reached out, pressed two fingers lightly against the edge of the notice, careful not to smear the paint, and tilted my head like I was reading something new. The paper was thick, official looking, designed to intimidate. They always are. "You really went through with it," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Margaret took a step closer, heels sinking slightly into the dirt, confident, certain. "We protect property values here, Ethan. That's what this community depends on." I nodded once slow. Behind her, I could see the rooftops of Willowbrook Estates stretching out in neat, identical rows, every lawn trimmed to the same height, every mailbox perfectly aligned. Order, control, dead, dressed up as comfort. I slipped my hands into my jacket pockets, feeling the familiar weight of my phone resting there, cold against my palm. She thought this was about rules, about paperwork, about a farmhouse that didn't fit her picture of perfect. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every single one of those houses behind her, every manicured lawn and polished driveway, was tied to a number, a file, a loan that didn't belong to her. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and something else beneath it. Ink, paper, signatures waiting to matter. I looked up at her, really looked this time, at the certainty in her eyes, the way she stood like she owned the ground she was standing on. Then I let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and said, "Before you take my house, you might want to check who owns yours." Margaret's smile did not disappear right away, but it changed, just slightly, like a crack forming under polished glass, the kind you only notice if you were standing close enough, and I was. The wind pushed the edge of the foreclosure notice against the gate, a soft tapping sound, irregular, almost impatient, and for a second nobody spoke. One of the men with the clipboard cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, the crunch of gravel louder now that the air had gone still. "I am not sure what you think you mean by that," Margaret said finally, her voice still controlled but missing that effortless confidence from a moment ago. She adjusted her blazer sleeve, a small, precise movement, like she was trying to reset the scene back into something she could manage. I let my hand fall away from the sign and turned slightly, glancing out toward the long stretch of land behind me, the pasture fading into the tree line where the fence posts leaned just enough to remind you they had been standing there for decades. My father used to say land does not care who thinks they own it. It remembers who actually does. "You file the lien," I said, keeping my voice even, almost conversational, like we were discussing weather instead of property. "You pushed it through fast, faster than usual." Her lips pressed together. "We followed every legal step required." I nodded again, slow, like I was agreeing with her, like I was giving her space to keep talking if she wanted to. The trick is to let people believe they are still in control long enough for them to show you everything. You used First Dominion, right? I added, glancing back at her. Local processing, standard foreclosure channel. One of the clipboard men looked up at that, just for a second, his eyes flicking between us before dropping back down to his papers. Margaret hesitated, and it was brief, barely there, but it was enough. That is none of your concern, she said, a little sharper now. The air carried the faint smell of cut grass from somewhere down the road, mixed with the lingering paint and something colder, like the scent of paper fresh out of a printer. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and turned it in my hand without unlocking it, just feeling the smooth glass under my thumb. It is, I said quietly, because every mortgage in Willowbrook runs through that pipeline. I could see it now, the way the words landed, not like a punch, nothing dramatic, just weight, settling in places she had not expected. Behind her, the rows of houses looked different suddenly, not just structures, but numbers, agreements, obligations stacked on top of each other. Margaret let out a small laugh, forced, dismissive. You are out of your depth, Ethan. This is not some backroom deal you can talk your way out of. I almost smiled at that, but I kept it in, let it sit behind my eyes instead. You are right, I said. It is not backroom. I unlocked the phone, the screen lighting up in the shade of my porch, and for a moment I just held it there, not showing her, not yet, letting the silence stretch. The crow called again from the oak tree, louder this time, and somewhere a screen door slammed shut in the distance. It is all on record. I continued, my voice steady. Every loan, every payment schedule, every clause nobody reads until it matters. I looked back at her, meeting her eyes fully now. And you pushed this through without checking who holds the paper. The man with the clipboard shifted again, this time stepping half a pace back, like instinct was telling him something had changed even if he could not explain what. Margaret's posture stiffened, her chin lifting just a fraction, but the certainty was gone now, replaced by something tighter, more careful. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the motion slow, deliberate. You wanted procedure, I said. So did I. The wind picked up again, rattling the sign against the gate, the red letters flashing in the morning light, loud, confident, and already starting to feel like they did not belong there anymore. The silence stretched longer this time, heavier, like the air itself was waiting to see who would move first, and Margaret was the one who broke it, just not in the way she expected. She turned slightly toward the men behind her, her voice dropping half a level, controlled but edged now. Go ahead and finish marking the boundary, she said, waving a hand like she was dismissing a minor inconvenience, like I was just another problem to process. But neither of them moved right away. One of them glanced toward the road, the other down at his clipboard, flipping a page that did not need flipping. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. You might want to hold off on that, I said, calm, steady, not raising my voice, because I did not need to. Margaret's head snapped back toward me, a flash of irritation cutting through her composure. Excuse me, she said. The word came out sharper this time, less polished, more real. I stepped off the porch, the wood creaking under my weight, and walked down the short path toward the gate, stopping just a few feet from the fresh sign. Up close, I could see the small print at the bottom, the processing office, the loan reference, the institution handling the action. Details most people never read. Details that matter. You filed through First Dominion's regional office, I said, tapping lightly on the lower corner of the notice without smearing the paint. Batch processed, probably yesterday afternoon, rushed through this morning. One of the clipboard men looked up again, this time not even trying to hide it. Margaret crossed her arms tighter. That is standard procedure, she replied, but the confidence was thinning now, like a voice echoing in a room that had suddenly gotten bigger. I nodded, almost approving. It is, I said. Unless the asset you are trying to seize is tied to a portfolio you do not control. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, pushing dust across the driveway in thin, swirling lines, the dry scent of dirt mixing with the lingering paint. I could hear a car door slam somewhere down the street, distant, ordinary, the kind of sound that reminds you the world keeps moving even when everything right in front of you is about to change. Margaret took a small step forward, closing the distance, her heels pressing into the gravel. You are trying to intimidate us, she said, her voice lower now, more deliberate. This will not stop the process. I let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but without the humor. I am not stopping anything, I said. I am letting it finish. That landed differently. I saw it in her eyes, the way they narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in calculation, like she was trying to find the piece she was missing and realizing it was bigger than she thought. Behind her, the man with the clipboard took another half step back, his pen hovering over the paper, no longer writing. Do you know what happens when a servicing bank flags a foreclosure request for internal review? I asked, keeping my tone even, almost instructional. She did not answer. She did not need to. Everything pauses, I continued. Every notice, every filing, every step you think is already locked in. I reached into my pocket again, this time pulling out the phone and unlocking it, the screen reflecting faintly in her eyes as I angled it just enough for her to see the header, the name she had not expected. I did not hold it there long, just a second, just enough. And if the same entity holding that mortgage decides the filing was premature, I added, sliding the phone back into my pocket, then the people who pushed it get audited. The word hung there, quiet, precise, heavier than anything she had said all morning. Margaret's jaw tightened, her shoulders squaring like she was trying to rebuild her posture. From the ground up. You are bluffing, she said, but there was no conviction behind it now, just resistance. I looked past her, toward the rows of houses again, neat and identical, each one tied to something invisible but very real. Then I looked back at her and shook my head once. You filed against the wrong property, I said. And you did it using the one system I actually own. The tapping of the sign against the gate slowed, then stopped as the wind dropped, and for a moment everything went completely still, like the entire street had just realized the balance had shifted and there was no going back. Margaret did not speak right away this time, and that silence was louder than anything she had said before, stretching across the yard like a line nobody wanted to cross first, her eyes flicking past me for just a second toward the houses behind her, as if she could already feel something shifting there, something she could not control. The man with the clipboard lowered it slowly, the paper making a soft, dry sound as it brushed against his sleeve, and the other one took another step back, without realizing he had moved at all, like instinct was starting to override instruction. This is not how this works, Margaret said finally, but her voice had lost that polished edge, replaced with something tighter, more careful, like every word now had weight she had to account for. I tilted my head slightly, watching her, letting the moment breathe, because this was the part most people rush, the part where they think louder means stronger. It does not. You are right, I said. It usually is not. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint hum of a lawn mower from somewhere down the street, a steady mechanical rhythm that felt almost out of place against the tension sitting between us. I stepped closer to the gate, close enough now that the red letters filled my peripheral vision, bold and certain in a way that already felt outdated. But you skipped a step, I continued, tapping once against the wooden post, the sound hollow, familiar. You assumed the structure you were targeting was isolated. Margaret's brow tightened. It is a single property, she said, more defensive now, like she was repeating something she had already convinced herself of. I shook my head. Once. Nothing in that subdivision is isolated, I said. Every house behind you is tied together by the same lending structure, the same servicing agreements, the same oversight clauses buried 3 pages deep where nobody bothers to read. I could see it landing, not all at once, but in pieces, like she was trying to assemble a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. And when one file triggers a review, I added, keeping my voice steady, it does not stop at the edge of a single driveway. One of the men finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. Ma'am, if there is a review flag, we might need to pause until there is no review flag, Margaret snapped, cutting him off too quickly, too sharply, the reaction coming before the certainty. That was the tell. I let a small pause sit there, just long enough for that interruption to echo. There is now, I said quietly. The words did not need volume. They carried on their own. I pulled my phone out again, this time not showing it, just holding it at my side, thumb resting lightly against the screen. Somewhere in the distance, a car slowed as it passed the entrance to the road, the driver glancing over, curiosity pulling their attention toward the scene without understanding it. When a portfolio holder initiates an internal compliance check, I continued, the system does not ask for permission from a local board. Margaret's shoulders stiffened, her posture straightening like she was trying to hold on to something slipping through her hands. You are not the portfolio holder, she said, but now it sounded like a question she was asking herself as much as me. I met her gaze, steady, unblinking. You never checked who sits above the servicer, I replied. The lawnmower sound cut off abruptly somewhere down the street, leaving the air quieter than before, almost suspended. You saw a farmhouse that did not match your standards, I went on, and you treated it like a liability. I let that word sit for a beat, then added, but in your system, liability flows upward. The man with the clipboard lowered it completely now, his pen hanging useless at his side. Margaret looked past me again, but this time longer, her eyes tracing the rooftops, the identical fences, the uniform lines that suddenly did not look as solid as they had an hour ago. If this is some kind of financial trick, she started, but her voice faltered halfway through the sentence. I shook my head slightly. It is not a trick, I said. It is structure. The wind picked up once more, lighter now, brushing against the sign, but it no longer rattled with the same authority. It just moved, quietly, like something already on its way out. You tried to take one property. I finished, my voice calm, almost reflective. And in doing that, you just opened every file connected to it. Margaret's confidence did not collapse all at once. It thinned, like fog burning off under slow sunlight, leaving behind something exposed and less certain, her fingers tightening slightly against her folded arms as if she could physically hold the situation in place if she just stood firm enough. The man with the clipboard finally lowered it completely, the edge brushing against his leg, no longer pretending there was anything left to measure, and the other one shifted his stance again, this time turning his body slightly toward the road like he was already calculating his exit. You are making this sound bigger than it is, Margaret said, but her voice had lost its rhythm, the cadence uneven now, each word placed more carefully than before. I let a quiet breath pass through my nose, not quite a sigh, just enough to show I was still listening. It is bigger than it looks, I replied. That is the part people miss. The air felt different now, lighter but sharper, like the pressure had changed without warning, and even the smell of the fresh paint had started to fade, replaced by dust and dry wood and something older, something grounded. I glanced once more at the notice on the gate, then back at her. You filed an aggressive action against a secured asset, I said, my tone steady, almost instructional. That triggers a compliance cascade. She frowned slightly, the term unfamiliar or at least uncomfortable. A what? She asked. I nodded once. A cascade, I repeated. It starts with a review on the specific file, but it does not stay there. It spreads across the portfolio to verify consistency, accuracy, and authority. I could see it now, the way the words were landing deeper, not just on her, but on the two men behind her, who were no longer looking at the land at all, their attention fixed on me like they were hearing something they had not been trained to handle. Every loan tied to that system gets checked, I continued. Every signature, every approval, every line of authority. Margaret's jaw tightened again, but this time she did not interrupt. That was new. And if something does not line up, I added, the system does not ask who is important. It just locks. The word hung there, simple and clean. Lock. No drama, no noise, just consequence. A faint breeze moved through the yard, brushing against the trees at the edge of the property, leaves whispering softly like they had seen this kind of thing before. Margaret shifted her weight, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. You are assuming there is something wrong, she said, but now it sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I shook my head slowly. I am not assuming anything, I said. I am verifying. I reached into my pocket again, but this time I did not pull the phone out. I just let my hand rest there, thumb pressing lightly against the screen as if that alone was enough. Somewhere down the street, a garage door began to open, the low mechanical hum stretching across the quiet, a reminder that other people were waking up to a normal morning that was no longer normal for her. You built authority on top of visibility, I said, looking at her directly. Rules, notices, enforcement. Things people can see. I let a small pause sit between us, then added. But real control sits underneath all of that. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger this time, but in realization, slow and unwelcome. Behind her, one of the men finally spoke again, his voice lower than before. Ma'am, if there is a portfolio review, we could be required to suspend all actions until it clears. Margaret did not respond to him right away. She was still looking at me, trying to measure something that no longer fit inside her framework. The sign on the gate shifted slightly as the wind returned, but it did not sound the same anymore. It sounded loose, temporary, like something already being reconsidered. I tilted my head just a fraction and said quietly, "You thought you were enforcing a rule." Then I let the next part land without raising my voice at all. But what you actually did was pull a thread. Margaret did not answer right away, and this time it was not hesitation. It was calculation, the kind that happens when someone realizes the ground they are standing on is not as solid as they thought. Her eyes drifting again toward the rows of houses behind her. But now she was not looking at them with ownership. She was measuring distance, risk, exposure. The air felt thinner, sharper, and even the distant sounds had changed. The neighborhood no longer just background noise, but something listening, something waiting. One of the clipboard men finally tucked his pen into his shirt pocket, the small click louder than it should have been, and took a full step back, putting space between himself and the gate like proximity alone might become a liability. "We need to verify this," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, but it carried. Margaret's head turned toward him slowly, the movement controlled but edged, like she was deciding whether to correct him or ignore him. She chose neither. That told me everything. I shifted my weight slightly, the gravel pressing under my boots, steady, familiar, unchanged in a moment where everything else was starting to move. "Verification is already in motion," I said quietly, not looking at the man, keeping my focus on her. "You triggered it the moment you filed." The wind slid across the yard again, softer now, brushing against the trees and carrying with it the faint scent of paper and dust, like old records being pulled from storage. Margaret exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled, but it was not confidence anymore. It was containment. "Even if there is a review," she said, choosing her words carefully now, "it does not invalidate the violation." I nodded slightly, acknowledging the logic, because on the surface, she was not wrong. "The violation is not the issue," I replied. "Authority is." That word landed differently, deeper, because it was the one thing she had built everything on. Behind her, the identical rooftops sat in perfect rows, but now they looked less like control and more like exposure, every one of them tied into something she did not oversee. "You acted as if you had the final say," I continued, my voice steady, almost calm enough to be mistaken for casual. "But in a structured system, final authority does not sit where it is visible. It sits where the risk is carried." Her eyes flicked back to mine, sharper now, searching for something she could push against, something she could challenge. "And you are saying that is you," she said, not quite a question, not quite a statement. I held her gaze for a moment, then let it soften just slightly. "I am saying you never checked," I answered. That silence came back again, but this time it was heavier, like it had weight pressing down on every word left unsaid. Somewhere down the street, a second garage door opened, the low mechanical hum overlapping with the first, two separate sounds blending into one steady tone, like systems running in the background that nobody notices until something interrupts them. One of the men shifted again, pulling out his phone now, glancing at the screen, then back at Margaret, uncertainty clear in the tight line of his mouth. "Ma'am, if compliance gets involved, we could be flagged for improper escalation," he said carefully. Margaret did not respond to him, not immediately. She was still looking at me, but the expression had changed. The certainty was gone. In its place was something more precise, more cautious, like she was finally seeing the edges of something she had stepped into without understanding its shape. The foreclosure notice fluttered slightly on the gate, the red paint no longer bold, just loud in a way that felt temporary, like a marker that had been placed too early. I let a small pause stretch, then spoke again, quieter this time. "You wanted control over one property," I said. "But control comes with accountability." The words settled into the space between us, heavier than the last. "And accountability does not stay local." Margaret's fingers tightened again, just slightly, a small, involuntary movement, but enough to show the shift had already happened. The system she thought she was using was no longer a tool. It was a structure she had just activated without permission, and now it was moving on its own. The shift did not announce itself with noise or motion. It arrived quietly, like a system recalibrating behind the scenes, and I saw it first not in Margaret, but in the man holding his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, his eyes narrowing as he read something that had not been there a minute ago. The morning light caught the edge of the device, reflecting faintly across his face, and whatever he saw made him straighten, just slightly, like posture alone could help him process it faster. "Ma'am," he said again, but this time there was no hesitation, just uncertainty edged with urgency. Margaret did not look at him right away. She was still watching me, trying to hold on to whatever authority she believed she still had, but the delay was enough. He turned the screen toward her. "We just got a notice," he said. The words landed flat, factual, but heavy. "Internal review flag. Portfolio level." That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet confirmation that everything I had said was no longer theory. It was happening. Margaret's eyes flicked down to the screen, and I watched the change move through her expression in real time, subtle but undeniable, like a crack spreading under pressure. Her jaw tightened, then released, then tightened again as she read. The wind moved through the yard, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of another car passing by. But it all felt distant now, like the world had stepped back to give this moment space. "That does not mean anything yet," she said, but the words came slower now, measured, like she was choosing each one carefully to avoid saying the wrong thing. I did not interrupt. I let her have that sentence. Let her hear it herself. The other man shifted closer to her now, no longer standing apart, drawn in by the gravity of whatever had just appeared on that screen. "It is not just the property," he added quietly. "It says expanded review. All connected loans." Margaret's shoulders squared again, but this time it looked forced, like she was rebuilding structure on top of something that was already moving underneath her. "Then we cooperate," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "We provide documentation and proceed as required." I nodded once, acknowledging the attempt to regain control. "That is exactly what happens," I said. "Documentation gets reviewed." I let a small pause sit there, then added, "Every line of it." The sign on the gate shifted again, the edge peeling slightly where the paint had not fully dried, a small imperfection that had not mattered before, but stood out now. Margaret glanced at it, just for a second, then back at me, and I could see it clearly now, the realization settling in layers. This was no longer about my farmhouse. It had not been for a while. "You initiated enforcement under your authority," I continued, my voice calm, steady, almost neutral. "Now the system verifies whether that authority was valid." The word valid lingered, precise and unavoidable. Behind her, the neat lines of Willowbrook Estates sat unchanged, but the way she looked at them had shifted completely. They were no longer symbols of control. They were variables, exposure points, dependencies. "If anything in that chain does not align," I added, "the system does not just correct it. It freezes it." The man with the phone nodded slightly, almost unconsciously, as if he already knew that part. Margaret did not respond right away. She was still reading, still processing, still trying to understand how something so quiet could unravel something so carefully built. I slid my hands back into my pockets, the fabric cool against my fingers, and looked past her once more, across the rooftops, the driveways, the identical fences that suddenly felt less permanent than they had an hour ago. Then I brought my gaze back to her and said quietly, "You wanted to take one house." I let that sit for a beat. Now every house is part of the same question. The neighborhood did not stay quiet for long, because systems like this never do. They ripple, they echo, they reach places people never expect, and I could see it starting before anyone said a word, just in the way doors down the street began to open one by one, slow, cautious, like people stepping outside into something they could feel but not yet understand. A woman across the road paused halfway down her driveway, phone in hand, staring at her screen with a frown that deepened by the second. A man further down the block leaned against his truck, arms crossed, reading something over and over like it might change if he blinked enough times. The air carried a different kind of sound now, not noise, but reaction, low voices, footsteps, The subtle shift of a community realizing something had just been triggered that reached far beyond a single property line. Margaret saw it too. She had to. Her gaze moved. Past me again. But this time it did not linger on structures or symmetry. It locked onto people, onto movement, onto uncertainty spreading faster than anything she could contain. The man with the phone stepped closer to her, lowering his voice, but not enough to keep it from carrying across the few feet between us. "Ma'am, notifications are going out," he said. "Account alerts. Payment holds pending review." The words landed heavier than anything before them. Margaret's head turned sharply this time. No delay, no calculation, just reaction. "That is not possible," she said, but it came out thinner, stretched tight across something already breaking underneath. I did not move. I did not need to. I just watched as the reality of it unfolded in real time. Not dramatic, not explosive, just inevitable. The sign on my gate fluttered again, one corner peeling further now, the red paint no longer bold but uneven, like it had been placed before the story was finished. "When a portfolio review escalates," I said quietly, "risk protocols engage automatically." I kept my voice level, almost neutral, like I was explaining something simple, something already decided. Outgoing transactions pause. New actions freeze. Verification takes priority over enforcement. Margaret's breathing changed, just slightly, but enough to notice, the rhythm off by a fraction, like her body was trying to catch up with something her mind had not fully accepted yet. Behind her, more doors opened. More phones came out. A car engine started, then shut off again almost immediately, like the driver had changed their mind halfway through the motion. "You said this was about compliance," I continued, watching her closely now. "This is compliance." She shook her head once, a small, sharp motion, like she could reject the outcome if she rejected the premise. "You cannot just activate something like this," she said, but there was no structure behind the words anymore, just resistance. I tilted my head slightly. "I did not activate it," I replied. "You did." That was the line that settled it. Not because it was loud, but because it was final. The man with the clipboard looked down at the ground now, no longer pretending to be part of the process, just someone caught inside it. The other one stepped back entirely, creating distance not just from me, but from Margaret, from the situation itself. Margaret stood there, still, her posture upright, her expression controlled, but the control was different now, not authority, but containment, like she was holding herself together in a moment that was no longer hers to direct. The wind moved again, softer now, lifting the edge of the notice just enough to show the wood underneath, bare, unchanged, waiting. I slipped my hands deeper into my pockets, feeling the quiet weight of everything settling into place, and said, calm and steady, "You wanted to enforce a rule on one house." I let the words breathe for a second, then finished. "But you just froze an entire neighborhood." The neighborhood did not erupt. It tightened, like everything had been pulled into a smaller, sharper space where every movement meant something, and Margaret was standing at the center of it without the control she had built her identity around. Phones were still out, screens still glowing. People no longer pretending not to look, and the quiet conversations drifting through the air had a different tone now. Not curiosity, but concern, the kind that spreads fast when money is involved and certainty disappears. Margaret finally stepped back from the gate. Just one step, but it was the first real movement she had made since the notification hit, her heels pressing into the gravel with a sound that felt louder than it should have been. She looked down at the foreclosure notice, the red letters now slightly warped where the paint had begun to dry unevenly, and for a second her hand lifted like she might touch it, like she might steady it, but she stopped short. "This will be resolved," she said, but her voice no longer carried across the yard. It stayed close to her, contained, like she was speaking to herself as much as anyone else. I did not respond right away. I let the moment settle, let the system do what it does best, move quietly, enforce without needing to announce itself. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed harder than necessary, followed by a voice raised just enough to carry, frustration already starting to surface in places that had nothing to do with me directly. That is how these things work. They never stay contained. Resolution requires alignment. I said finally, my voice steady, calm, unchanged from the beginning, because nothing about my position had shifted. And right now, nothing is aligned. Margaret looked at me again, and this time there was no attempt to dominate the space, no performance, just calculation and something else beneath it, something closer to realization. What do you want? She asked. The question came out direct, stripped of everything unnecessary, and for the first time that morning, it sounded honest. I considered it for a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because this was the part that mattered, the part where people expect a demand, a negotiation, something loud to match everything that had just happened. I shook my head slightly. This was never about what I want, I said. It was about what you try to take. The wind moved again, softer now, brushing past the gate, lifting the edge of the notice just enough to show more of the wood underneath, solid, unchanged, untouched by everything layered on top of it. Margaret followed that movement with her eyes, then reached out and pulled the notice free in one quick motion, the paper tearing slightly where it had stuck to the paint, a small, imperfect sound that echoed more than it should have. She looked at it for a second, then folded it once, sharply, like she could reduce its meaning by reducing its size. Behind her, the two men were already stepping back toward their vehicle, no longer part of the action, just witnesses to something that had moved beyond them. The neighborhood noise did not stop, but it shifted again, less uncertain now, more reactive, calls being made, messages being sent, the ripple continuing outward. Margaret held the folded notice at her side, her grip tight, her posture still straight, but no longer anchored. "We will be in touch," she said, the words formal again, but not powerful, just procedural. I nodded once, acknowledging it without adding anything. She turned then, walking back toward the street, her steps measured but faster than before, like distance itself might help her regain control somewhere else. I watched her go, the white lines of the neighborhood stretching out behind her, no longer uniform in meaning, just connected in ways she had finally begun to understand. The gate creaked softly as the wind pushed against it again, the spot where the notice had been already drying, already returning to what it was before. I rested my hand against the wood, feeling the rough grain under my fingers, steady, familiar, unchanged. Then I looked out across the land, the fence line, the trees, the open space that had always been mine, and said quietly, more to the air than anyone else, "They thought they owned my house." I let that sit for a moment, then finished. But all they ever owned was the debt.